Hi, I'm Thaddeus Oliver.
And I'm Alex Hill, and today we'll be talking about one of the most pivotal wars that sparked a moment in history for the United States of America.
Yes, we're talking about the Spanish-American War. It is often forgotten, but it was one of the most profound moments in our history when talking about how our nation expanded for over a century.
Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's dive in.
So in the late 1800s, Cuba was referred to as the pearl of the Spanish Empire. They were referred to that as a result of the fact that they had a lot of natural resources and were overall just an incredible economic boon. As a result of this, Spain took great care to make sure that they monitored Cuba very strongly and making sure that everybody was kind of doing exactly what they wanted them to do, which led to a little bit of controversy as the Spanish Empire's government officials that were over there started to treat the native Cubans differently than the colonial Spanish. This led to an organization known as the Junta de Información being formed, and this group called for equality within the island of Cuba. However, what they did not bank on was the United States having individuals disliking the Spanish government strategies and beginning to voice their discontent to America's government, saying we can't just let the Spanish do this kind of stuff in Cuba, so close to the United States. One of the items that actually led to America's discontent was the creation of concentration camps in Cuba. So when Americans heard about these concentration camps, they began to report back to different newspapers such as the New York World and the New York Post. These newspapers began to release articles on the concentration camps that were incredibly hyperbolized and incredibly exaggerated in order to sell more copies. This is one of the first known iterations of what we call yellow journalism. Specifically, the United States was not exactly thrilled with the economic competition being so close to home, and also the political disagreement between the United States government and the Spanish government about how to handle Cuba. Because if there's one thing Americans can't stand, it's when other people are being oppressed, at least sometimes. When we began to have this disagreement spreading throughout the United States, the American people start asking President McKinley at the time, saying, please, you've got to go to war. We've got to stop the Spanish from what they're doing. But McKinley never really committed to doing one thing or the other. He would send a ship, he would send the USS Maine down to kind of keep an eye on things, but he never really committed to a full-on military action.
Now, Cuba was slowly fighting for the right to declare independence, and America supported this because of the U.S.'s influence on the Cuban government's shift to a democratic state.
Now, America didn't go looking for a war, but they weren't going to back down from Spain, which was an oppressive power at the time. Also, the convenience of the situation was a little too perfect. America had acquired California and Texas and a number of other states, and they were thirsting for more acquisition.
Then on February 15, 1898, the mysterious bombing of the USS Maine sent the entire nation into a frenzy. Even though the origin was unknown, fingers were quickly pointed at Spain, and the media speculated that their malicious retaliation had fallen onto American soil. This led to President William McKinley officially declaring war on April 21, 1898. One of the biggest factors during and leading up to the war was the U.S.'s use of propaganda and pictures to display Spain as a violent, destructive power. Now, use this to get the population to be pro-war and so that they could ease their way into expanding their territory.
Now, this splendid little war wasn't only fought in the Caribbean, because Spain was using their violent rage in the Philippines as well. So this battle was fought and won by the United States at the Manila Bay in the Philippines on May 1st, 1898.
After gaining their first major win in the war, U.S. landed troops in Cuba with confidence on June 22, 1898. This landing led to the rest of the year being riddled with various wars and conflicts that would involve many civilians needing to relocate.
From a list of battles, the Battle of Alcoquete and the Battle of San Diego Bay, the most prominent of them all was the Battle of San Juan Hill.
Approximately 2 months after the declaration of war, the U.S. Naval Fleet and Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders were planning on an attack on land and sea at the Santiago de Cuba. This led to the 5th Corps fighting through the outer defenses for Santiago for General William Shafter to plan the next attack on the towns of Ecní and San Juan Hill.
In the Battle of San Juan Hill, the Rough Riders basically stole the whole show when they left their horses to run past the Spanish forces and take San Juan Hill. Then they would have the city. Then they would hunt after the city of Santiago.
The Battle of Santiago was essentially the last straw for the Spanish-American War, and it concluded in a victory for the United States, and Spain ultimately surrendered. Later on, both countries would sign the Protocol of Peace on August 12, 1898, and the Treaty of Paris on December 10th of the same year to officially end the war diplomatically.
Reviewing the battles of the war, it is very enticing and shows the elevation of strength of the United States military since becoming a nation. But progression made by the Americans during and after is also solidified that the country was making enormous changes from the scrappy, newly formed nation to a esteemed global powerhouse. This is known still today. Now, the result of the war led to America getting claims over Guam, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Hawaii. When you add yellow journalism to that, the public and the government were ready to push forward the imperialistic ideas.
Now, even though the war didn't even last a full year, America had proven that the tide was changing. America had beaten a Spanish empire that had controlled the Western Hemisphere for centuries. They had defeated them in land and naval combat. This proved that America's militaristic and imperialistic ideas were enough to topple such a powerful nation.
Now, what came with this was the Filipino people's discomfort. After the land acquisition, they felt like their Declaration of Independence was being thrown in the trash, taken for granted. So they began to fight back against the military U.S. forces. After they did this, the nationalists of the country believed that seeking freedom was more important than learning new ideals.
Over 220,000 Filipinos were killed in the Philippine-American War over a span of 3 years and proved how desperate the United States would get, even after a small annexed island. Now, the flashing lights of commercial trade and the fear of either Japan or Germany taking over the land was enough for the United States to go to war.
Since Theodore Roosevelt was the president after President McKinley's assassination, he used his basic ideology to pretty much spread the message that America should be ready to negotiate, but they should also be ready to defend themselves in combat. He used this to gain the Panama Canal, and this was also used during the Russo-Japanese War.
Then Woodrow Wilson would take after Taft's humdrum presidency and lead the country into the First World War. Now, many people believe that this war was the start of America's ideology and imperialism, but really how America progressed in the late 1800s with the Alaskan Purchase, the Industrial Boom, and the climax of the Spanish-American War really showed that America was already heading in the right direction.
The United States were already en route to expand their democratic thoughts. Now, they used the Spanish-American War to show the rest of Europe that they weren't weak and were in fact ready. I don't think without this war that World War I would have been prepared nor started.
Basically, to sum up everything we said so far, the Spanish-American War was the start of America's imperialistic growth and the rise of patriotism throughout the homes of citizens throughout the entire nation.